Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for COVID-19 and intergenerational shared sites, lessons on promoting connections between young and old during a pandemic and beyond. I'm Lynette Fraga, the Chief Executive Officer of Child Care Aware of America and proud board member of Generations United. Today's briefing is co-sponsored by Senator Casey of Pennsylvania, Generations United, and our terrific partner, the Eisner Foundation. Before we get started, I'm going to cover a few quick housekeeping items. As you can see, we are using Zoom webinar today, so you won't be able to see your fellow participants' faces, but we still encourage you to use the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen to connect with one another. In fact, why don't we warm up the chat box now? We'd love to see who is here today, so feel free to type in the chat box your name and where you're from. After our speakers today, we will have some additional time for Q&A. So we encourage you to submit your questions of our speakers throughout the webinar. You can do this by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please just be mindful to enter your questions into Q&A instead of chat. We also wanted to give you a heads up that the slides and recording of this webinar will be available after the event. Everyone who attends today will receive an email with links to those later this week, and they will also be posted to Generations United's website. And lastly, I want to invite all of you to join us on social media today using the hashtag #IGSharedSites. Today's topic is very important to me, and I am sure for all of you as well. This pandemic has exacerbated the existing inequities in the child care and elder care systems. Systems that, as we build back, can be strengthened if we use an intergenerational solutions lens that recognizes that young and old thrive together. We need to place more value on those who care for our children and elders. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Trent Stamp, CEO of the Eisner Foundation, our valued partner which identifies, advocates for, and invests in high quality and innovative intergenerational programs. Trent.
Thank you so much, Lynette. It is a genuine pleasure to be here. I want to thank you for the kind introduction and also for your obvious dedication to this very important work. And of course, I wish to take this brief moment to thank the attendees for being here and, more importantly, for your interest in intergenerational shared spaces. As you alluded to, as many people may know, the Eisner Foundation is the only U.S. foundation exclusively supporting intergenerational solutions to society's challenges. In addition to our grant making, we also have our annual Eisner Prize for Intergenerational Excellence, something that Generations United was a worthy winner for a few years ago. And I am pleased to share that our recently announced 2020 recipient of the Eisner Prize was a shared site in Puerto Rico called ARECMA, a fantastic organization in a community well known for intergenerational commitments and long-term community. It's a fantastic organization with indoor and outdoor spaces for intergenerational classes, community events, and more. So moving on, for several years, we have partnered with Generations United to define the high interest in shared sites and where the roadblocks are to creating more of them. We are proud supporters of this effort because we know how effective intergenerational shared spaces can be, and we know there aren't enough of them in our communities across the country. The results of this partnership include a wide range of resources that policymakers and community members alike can use to start or define such spaces, including opinion polling, case studies, creation and evaluation toolkits, and a comprehensive guide to funding streams, the age-old question of how do I pay for it? Obviously, COVID-19 has changed the way that shared sites operate right now, and soon you'll hear some of the creative ways that organizations have adjusted in the past few months. But even though we're likely to be dealing with this pandemic for way too much longer, we should also be taking the time to envision what we want our post-COVID communities to look like. We can start planning now, and those plans should include spaces for people of all ages to come together and reconnect after so much time physically apart. Again, I want to thank you all for your interest. I want to thank you for being here. And I'm very pleased to turn it over to my great friend, Donna Butts, Executive Director of Generations United. Thank you.
Trent, thank you so much for your support, for your partnership. We really, really appreciate it. I also want to thank everybody who's joined us today. This has been a really tough time for a lot of us in many, many ways. And one of the bright spots is what we're experiencing today. Normally, when we do a Hill briefing, we'd have 50 to 100 people, mostly from the DC area. Today, we have close to 600 people from around the country and several international colleagues who've been able to join us. I really believe that this can help make our unified voices as advocates for intergenerational solutions even stronger. Let's not squander this opportunity. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the essential role of caregivers, those who care for us when we're young and when we're old, and given us an opportunity to reimagine care from a lifespan perspective, rather than segregating care by age. Lessons that we're learning during the pandemic reinforce what we already know. Intergenerational shared sites where children, youth, and older adults participate in services and/or programs at the same time in the same space value people at all ages and stages of life. These are places where older adults have been comforted by exchanges with younger participants, whether through drawings, window visits, or parades. Social isolation is reduced even during social distancing. Essential workers have access to childcare they need in these intergenerational facilities so they can focus on frontline work and not worry about the safety of their children, knowing they're cared for. While these sites are still figuring it out, we've been so impressed with the creative responses that they've used so far, including streaming video of the children in childcare into the senior housing wing of a program, exchanging letters and art projects, those window visits, those parades where they can see each other and wave and smile, as well as outdoor distance visits where they can see each other even when they can't touch. Now compare that to the horror stories that we've all heard about older loved ones facing the pandemic isolated and alone. Intergenerational shared sites have provided a lifeline as well during a time when facilities caring for older adults are experiencing staff shortages. The Geriatric Career Development Program in the New Jewish Home in New York has for more than 15 years provided underserved high school students with allied healthcare certifications, college preparation, and invaluable experience caring for older adults. When the pandemic led to restrictions on volunteers in the facility, rather than turn the students away, the home hired them as staff so their education wouldn't be disrupted. And in return, it gave the facility a crop of new certified nursing assistants when they needed it the most. It was a win-win-win that wouldn't have happened had they not been an intergenerational shared site. One of the executive director said it was the right thing for us to do to follow our organization's values. One of the students said during the whole pandemic, she'd heard about frontline workers, and she said, I'd heard about the front lines and I wanted to help. Now I am. Overcoming the enormous challenges presented by COVID-19, the program proudly boasts that 100% of this year's 64 participants are graduating from high school, and all are college bound. That's a good news story during a time when we can all use some good news. In a public opinion survey we did with the Eisner Foundation a couple of years ago, we found that 4 out of 5 Americans who responded said that places and spaces that serve and engage younger and older people are the type of facilities and places where they would want their loved ones to be, or they themselves would want to be when it came to needing care. Yet the process to create such sites is needlessly complicated by barriers such as age-segregated funding streams, zoning, or regulatory requirements that were designed for only one generation at a time. We believe that's why in a survey conducted by Dr. Shannon Jarrett initially only identified 105 programs in the country. That number's grown, but the potential is far greater, far greater. The good news is that thanks to Senators Casey and Jones, the Older Americans Act, which was reauthorized earlier this year, prioritizes programs that serve both young and old and encourages intergenerational shared sites, such as co-located child care and long-term care facilities. Older Americans Act is a great place to begin. You can help by studying our Older Americans fact sheet and encouraging your elected officials to support the intergenerational provisions. Ask them to join the congressional leaders who stepped up so far to encourage funding for these important programs. If you work for a congressional office and would like to learn more about how your member can become a champion for all generations, please contact our policy staff, Jaya Lent or Diana Rosnowski, and they'd be happy to help you. But whatever you do and whoever you are, don't stop just with the Older Americans Act. Look at our new fact sheet on funding resources, federal funding resources, and opportunities. Think about the possibilities like Head Start, community development block grants, food and nutrition programs, housing, AmeriCorps, as well as reimbursements and state and local funding opportunities. To learn more about how to build or strengthen intergenerational shared sites, keep an eye out because later on this year, we're releasing a new toolkit about how to create and strengthen these programs. Together, we can make intergenerational sites the norm, not an anomaly. Thank you. And now I'm sending it back to the fabulous Dr. Lynette Fraga.
Thank you, Donna. You are so right in how now more than ever, the importance of care has been spotlighted and it needs to sustain. I'm so excited about hearing about all these amazing sites that you described. And I want to share a little bit about the state of childcare right now. Last month, our organization, Childcare Aware of America, released a new report titled Picking Up the Pieces. And it showed the very real impact of COVID-19 layered on an already fragile childcare system. And it really is in a moment of being shattered. Many childcare providers remain closed or in danger of closing, and parents are struggling to find childcare arrangements that will allow them to work productively. And without a reliable, steady workforce, not only can economic recovery be out of reach, but all of the amazing things that Donna was describing in terms of intergenerational relationships would also be compromised. So the reality is the cost to provide this quality care that's so needed, the wonderful experiences that Donna described, the challenges and the cost to provide that kind of care could increase because of those necessary safety measures, of course, the health and safety of our providers and our families, but there will be lower provider-child and child ratios and increased costs for things like personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies. And these safety measures are critical as we're looking at the most recent research. Yale just published last week an article in the journal Pediatrics, and the study found that exposure to childcare, though not associated with an elevated risk of spreading COVID-19 from children and adults, provided the childcare programs took multiple health and safety measures and were located in communities where the spread of COVID-19 was contained. We need to think about our communities. We need to think about how safe they are. Our report and the Yale study both show that an investment in our childcare system, quality programs, focusing on the amazing relationships between generations, so incredibly critical as we move forward. As Donna mentioned, we have an opportunity to reimagine care. In a blog Donna and I wrote recently about intergenerational care, we celebrated this year's National Teacher of the Year, Tabitha Rossbury, who teaches at a public preschool that's housed in a local retirement community, a nursing home. Tabitha's program has the highest preschool literacy and math scores in the district. And she said that connecting with builders has, quote, built so much empathy in the children's hearts. This is supported by research that shows preschool children involved in intergenerational programs had higher social developmental scores than children who didn't participate in such programs. As an advocate for quality childcare and early childhood education, I believe in the effectiveness of intergenerational shared sites. Our next speaker, Colleen Farrell, also understands the importance of intergenerational care. She is the parent of 2 children who attend the Intergenerational Learning Center, a child care center that serves children ages 6 weeks to 5 years old and is located within Providence Mount St. Vincent, a senior care living facility in Seattle, Washington. Colleen also happens to work as public relations manager and foundation annual giving manager at the Mount. So she has the unique perspective as an employee and a parent at this shared site. Colleen.
Hi, thank you so much, Lynette, and thank you to Generations United for having me today. As Lynette said, my name is Colleen, and I have the great fortune of having my 2 children enrolled in the Intergenerational Learning Center at Providence Mount St. Vincent in Seattle, Washington. My daughter Lillian is 3.5, and my son Matthew is 11 months old. I may be a bit impartial, but I think my children are pretty amazing. And as much as my husband and I would like to take credit for that, I know in my heart they are becoming caring, empathetic, and thoughtful children, in large part because of their time at the ILC. A perfect example of this was one day before the pandemic, my mother took my daughter to the park. She was maybe 2.5 at the time. As they walked toward the playground, my mom noticed an elderly woman in a wheelchair, looking down, possibly sleeping. Before they could even make it to the swings, my daughter walked straight up to this woman, pat her leg, and said hello. The woman immediately became alert, and a huge smile came across her face. My daughter did this without a moment's hesitation because that is what she's been taught from the day she joined the ILC. You greet your residents' friends with a handshake, a pat on the leg, a smile, and a hello. And that is who she thought this woman was, one of her resident friends from the Mount. She wasn't scared of the wheelchair or nervous around someone who looked or seemed a little different than her. She was excited to see a friend. Before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, stories like these are what I would tell when people asked about the ILC. But as an essential employee during this unbelievably challenging time, I have come to appreciate the ILC in a whole new way. During an uncertain time, it has been a constant in my children's lives. It has been a place where they are loved and cared for, and a place that all of us can depend on. And even though the in-person visits between the children and the residents have stopped, the connections are still very much there. Children are making cards, pictures, even posters for the residents. They have GoPro cameras in the classrooms and record the children, and the videos get played on an internal TV channel here at the Mount for residents to watch. The ILC was specifically designed with an intergenerational focus. So there are windows looking into a few classrooms from inside our building, and there are even a few lucky residents who have windows overlooking the playground, so they can see and hear your children playing outside. We're also working on getting window visits planned, and teachers and caregivers at the Mount are continuing to find new ways to keep these important connections and relationships open. I want to end with one last point. Being a working parent is hard. To leave your children in someone else's care can be scary, but that was never a problem for my husband and me. Because we knew that from their very first day, not only would our children have people that would teach them and care for them, but they would have an entire community supporting them. Residents, caregivers, volunteers, and family members who would dote on them, love them, teach them invaluable life lessons, and help us raise them. This is the type of community that an intergenerational shared site makes possible. And this is why I truly could not be more grateful for the Mount and the Intergenerational Learning Center, and why I believe that shared sites like this will make an incredible impact on our world and are especially important during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Colleen, so much. What a powerful, powerful testament. Just amazing. Thank you. I am so now pleased to introduce Elsa and Scott Detweiler of Los Angeles, California. Scott and Elsa are the caretakers of Elsa's 92-year-old mother, Maria Akos, who is a participant at One Generation, an adult daycare and intergenerational shared site in Van Nuys. While One Generation opened 40 years ago as a center for older adults, the addition of a child care in 1994 changed the nonprofit's course. It's now a model intergenerational shared site and one that serves a multicultural population where preschoolers learn Mandarin and Spanish. Teachers speak 12 languages, and the adults enrolled in the day program hail from 24 countries. Though the pandemic has put a halt to in-person interactions between youth and older adults, staff at One Generation are still finding creative ways to continue to serve young and old while preserving the intergenerational friendships from afar. Elsa and Scott.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here. My name is Elsa Detweiler, and this is my husband, Scott.
Hello.
We are the caregivers for my mom, Maria Acosta, who attended the One Generation Intergenerational Facility for several years, up until last March when it was shut down due to the pandemic. My mom thrived at One Generation because of the consistently conscientious care that the staff delivered every day, and because of the deep friendships that she had developed over the years. Her favorite thing about the facility, and probably ours too, is the fact that it's not just an adult daycare, it is an intergenerational facility.
And my mother-in-law really loves interacting with the children at the child's daycare next door. You see, our children are grown, and we don't have any young children running around the house, and none of our friends have young children anymore. So One Generation gives my mother-in-law the opportunity to daily interact with small children. And whether it's coloring with them or singing songs, she loves it. We also think that this is a great opportunity, and it works both ways. The children benefit from the interaction as well. It's fair to say that Los Angeles is a community of transplants. That is, most people here are not from here. Elsa's from Peru, and I'm from New Orleans. Our children grew up without my parents here being around. The interaction between the children and the seniors, we believe, is a true long-term blessing for our community at a macro level.
Since the pandemic began, One Generation has continued to facilitate drive-through events so they can see the staff members and receive treats and prizes, as well as Zoom conferences. These include bingo, chair exercises, which are lots of fun for my mom, and daily meetings, because between the seniors and the children, the child's daycare, my mom gets to watch the children listen to stories. She watches them dance and play with each other. She really thrives on this because it's become her only link to her friends, to the children, everybody, young and old. She's 92. She doesn't have a cell phone that she can pull out and call friends or family with. But she and her friends rely on Zoom for their daily interactions. They catch up with one another and sing songs, etc. As for the kids, my mom knows these kids. So seeing them on Zoom regularly allows her to watch them grow and for them to see her smiling face. Lastly, we would like to acknowledge the staff at One Generation. They're truly special people. They're really angels. We're grateful for their warmth and loving care for my mom. Scott and I appreciate any and all of the support for One Generation and hope that facilities like this become more common. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you all today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elsa and Scott. And I just have to reflect for a moment all these amazing words that I'm hearing from both Elsa, Scott, Colleen: care, nurturing, friendship, respect, relationships, and through the pandemic, creativity and connections, and the staff as being so key to all of this working. Thank you so much for sharing about your experiences. So our next speaker today is Suzanne Lair, site principal at Jenks West Elementary School in Jenks, Oklahoma, which was named a Best Intergenerational Community by Generations United in 2017. Suzanne's shared site represents a unique partnership between Grace Living Center, a skilled nursing center, and the Jenks public school system. which more than 20 years ago took a bold leap when they built 2 public school classrooms in the center of the Skilled Nursing Center, as well as a playground in the atrium. Suzanne.
Well, thank you, Lynette, and thank you to Generations United for the opportunity to share today. Just a little background about the Jinx Grace Intergenerational Partnership. Grace is an intergenerational program for pre-kindergarten and kindergarten students and residents at Grace Skilled Nursing Facility located in Jinx, Oklahoma, which is a suburb of Tulsa. The program is a long-term community partnership between Jinx Public Schools and Grace Skilled Nursing Facility that started about 22 years ago when Don Greiner, who at that time was the owner and CEO, was in the beginning stages of renovating Grace Living Center. Mr. Greiner was looking for a way to have residents observe children playing at a child care facility located just next door. Well, that child care facility just happened to be part of the Jinx Public Schools community education program. Mr. Greiner reached out to the Jinx district and the idea quickly expanded well beyond just a playground next door, as Mr. Greiner invested about $200,000 to bring students into the facility. The renovation included adding 2 classrooms, a small playground, and an extensive atrium commons area within the nursing facility. For the past 22 years, Grace has leased the 2 classrooms to the Jinx district for $1 per year. Grace has also funded a liaison position that is mostly dedicated to support the intergenerational program. Well, in a normal year, our 45 pre-K and kindergarten students enjoy in-person experiences like exercising together, gardening together, singing, dramatic play, shared study, and of course, the weekly ice cream socials where our littles come together with the grands for conversations while they enjoy ice cream. During the pandemic, our students have been physically relocated back to the main elementary school site, and we've been making connections such as book buddies remotely. Book Buddies is a daily activity between the students and the grands. We've been meeting virtually for Book Buddies for a few weeks now, and our students are loving listening to the grands read aloud to them. Our students started by brainstorming agreements about what their time with the Book Buddies should look like. These agreements were shared with the grands, and they hang just above the book nook area to serve as a reminder to our students. During Book Buddies, 2 students at a time gather in the book nook area as the teacher helps them set up Chromebooks and connect with the grands, who are assisted by the Grace liaison. They have a brief time for the students and the grands to communicate back and forth to greet one another, and then the sound is muted on the school side to eliminate the noise distraction from the classroom as the grands read aloud to our students. While our teachers are making great efforts to connect virtually, we are all missing the in-person connections. One of our grands, Grandma Betty, comes to mind. She's very quiet and she says very little, but she loves visiting the classroom. Last year, a couple of our pre-K students were particularly drawn to her. Every single time she came to the classroom, these 2 little girls just lit up and never missed a chance to read or interact with Grandma Betty. Grandma Betty was also a regular every single afternoon during school dismissal as our students lined up. She offered our students a smile, a wave, a high five, or a fist bump as they left for school each day. We're continuing to look for other ways to connect at a distance. In fact, we're exploring the possibility of transporting our kindergarten students over to play on the playground so that the grands can watch from inside the atrium area. This has been a challenging time for all of us, but we're committed to finding alternative solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I am so reflecting on the best of what I'm hearing around what we know of early childhood and early childhood development and it coming to life on computer through readings and on the playgrounds, just tremendous. So thank you so much for sharing. And I wrote down littles coming together with the grands, absolutely fantastic. So we are now pleased to welcome remarks from Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, which is home of one of the longest running shared sites in the country. The senator is a key champion for grand families, children, and older adults. We thank him for his leadership in elevating shared sites in the Older Americans Act, which was reauthorized earlier this year. And we also applaud his role in introducing the Aging Together Act with Senator Doug Jones, which authorized a grant program included in the Older Americans Act to promote multi-generational engagement activities that improve health and wellness across generations. Senator Casey was unable to be with us today, so we will be sharing this brief video with his remarks.
Thank you to both Generations United and the Eisner Foundation for this invitation to address you today. We know that in this time of crisis, our families, especially our children and our seniors, are facing immense challenges. The need to support each other and safely form connections within our communities has never been more important. In the past, in times of trouble, older generations have looked to younger generations for inspiration and joy, and younger generations have also looked to their elders, their older relatives or others, for wisdom and care and love. However, during this crisis, these two generations are being kept apart from one another. While that separation may be for good reasons in the middle of a public health crisis, we are losing an essential exchange of thoughts and ideas between and among those Americans. Just one example from my work in the Senate, back in 2018, I remember specifically a visit to the Ben Salem Senior Center in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Each year, that center holds an intergenerational art exhibit displaying artwork from seniors and students across the community. It was heartwarming to see the joy that art had brought to that Ben Salem community. Art is just one example of the ways that generations can engage one another. And this engagement, especially through intergenerational shared sites, helps us to strengthen our communities. That's why Senator Jones of Alabama and I advocated for language that would prioritize funding within the Older Americans Act to support intergenerational engagement, including the development of shared sites. Now, that language fortunately made it into the final bill, the reauthorization of the Older Americans Act, and that was signed in March of this year. But we've got to do more than that. We must continue to support our ever-changing communities and actively foster environments that promote education and understanding for young people while decreasing social isolation that seniors experience far too often. Addressing the pandemic head-on must be part of that initiative. We need a big, bold plan to tackle the virus and get our country back on its feet. We have a lot of work to do together, and I look forward to working with you on those challenges. But I do want to thank you for your work, and to thank you especially for your commitment to intergenerational engagement. May God bless your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Casey. Now I'd like to welcome Samantha Koehler, Senior Policy Aide, U.S. Senate Special Committee on Aging Minority Staff with Senator Casey. Samantha was deeply involved in developing the multi-generational activities and shared sites language in the Older Americans Act. She will provide some additional policy context about how policymakers and programs can make the vision laid out in the Older Americans Act a reality. Samantha.
Hi, everyone. So happy to join you today. As Lynette stated, my name is Samantha. I'm a staffer on the Senate Special Committee on Aging under Senator Casey. And as Senator Casey shared, and really as we've heard from our panelists today, there are some really amazing intergenerational programs taking place across the country. And Senator Casey mentioned one program that we have in Pennsylvania that hosts an intergenerational art exhibit, but really across Pennsylvania and across the country, programs are doing amazing work, whether it be a daycare co-located in a long-term care facility or a senior center that partners with the local school, and honestly, everything in between. And of course, the COVID pandemic has really fundamentally altered each and every one of our lives, closing schools and senior centers and stopping or limiting visits altogether to many long-term care facilities. But really what we've heard from our speakers is that many programs are continuing their great work, even in the face of many obstacles. And even before the pandemic, and one obstacle that intergenerational shared sites have really struggled with is, and I'm sure many of you are well acquainted with, is finding adequate funding to support the work taking place in communities. And that's something that we heard firsthand from Pennsylvanians and national programs when we were working to reauthorize the Older Americans Act. And the reauthorization of the act, as Senator Casey said, that was signed into law earlier this year, that was really the culmination of 2 years of work, of research, speaking to and learning from programs that serve seniors across the country. And overwhelmingly, we heard from these programs, the Older Americans Act is working, but there are a couple of things we need to tweak around the edges so it works a little bit better for us. And support for intergenerational programs was one of those things. And like Senator Casey said in his remarks, he worked with Senator Jones of Alabama to introduce language in the act to expand upon an existing Older Americans Act demonstration program to provide greater guidance to the Aging Network to carry out intergenerational programming. And that language would specifically direct resources, including grant funding, towards communities to develop and support intergenerational programming and intergenerational shared sites, all of which really to foster growth and innovation and reduce social isolation, which we know is so prevalent right now. Getting that language into the bill was the first step. Seeing that signed into law this March was the second step. But now we need to encourage Congress to appropriate dollars so that funds can be made available to communities to actually implement this work on the ground. And that's where all of you come in. I know that many of you are working under difficult circumstances with minimal staff and on small budgets in the middle of a pandemic, stretching to really make your programs work. And I invite you all to reach out to your elected officials and invite them to learn about the work that you all do. I know it can be a little scary if you've never spoken to your member of Congress and perhaps you don't know who to reach out to. The first step I would suggest is to just call their office, explain who you are and what you do, and ask them for the best staff member to be in contact with in that office. And if no one answers, just leave a voicemail and ask for a call back and be persistent. I can't stress that enough. Once you get in contact with a staff member, I would ask for a 30-minute meeting with that person, and specifically the person who works on issues related to intergenerational shared sites. And the office can certainly direct you to the right staff member for that. When you're able to get a conversation scheduled, talk about the importance of and the benefits of intergenerational shared sites for children and for seniors. Talk about your challenges that you experience on the ground and the work that you're doing, and have, really most importantly, specific asks that you need from your member of Congress to keep serving the community. In this case, and it's particularly related to the Older Americans Act, that would be appropriating dollars towards the grant program that would fund intergenerational shared sites. And in the case of programs that are able to safely operate in person, or in the future when we're able to safely gather in person, you could also ask that staff member or the member of Congress if they would be interested in doing a virtual video visit where they can see the work that you're doing on a virtual platform like Zoom or whatever platform we're using these days. But really, regardless of the type of meeting you have, it's so important to share real stories with them from your participants of your program so they can better understand the benefits of these intergenerational shared sites and the challenges you're all experiencing, whether it be related to COVID or beyond. And educating your member is the first step in the right direction and these meetings really encourage members to become champions of intergenerational shared sites and intergenerational programming broadly. But I would say don't let this first meeting with your member be the only step you take. Continue to follow up with them. Ask their staff if it's okay for you to add them to your e-newsletter or any mailings you have that go out. If you have something big happening in your program, email your contact in the office and let them know that this is happening. And when we're safely returning to in-person events again, invite that staff member or the member of Congress to attend that event in person. The initial education, like I said, is so important, but keeping them engaged in your work is really the hardest part. And I know that we can sometimes feel like we're being pests when that happens, but don't worry about it. Keep following up with them and it'll keep you at the top of their mind. And then really the more they understand your work, the more likely it is that they'll engage in it and be willing to do things like push their other colleagues in Congress to appropriate dollars towards supporting intergenerational shared sites. So I know I left you with the to-do list, but I know you all can do it. I know you're all doing great work and should be sharing that work with your member of Congress. So I'll just finish by saying thank you to all of you for being on the webinar today and really for the work that you're doing on the ground every day. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Samantha. That was absolutely perfect. The specific advice that you gave, the real hands-on advice and guidance, I think is what people really need to hear. And they need to realize that their voice matters. We work in Washington, D.C. We're here, we talk to people, but what really matters is when a constituent contacts their elected official and says this is important and continues to contact them again and again. So I really appreciate that advice. But we're also grateful for your commitment, Samantha, and the leadership that Senator Casey's provided. It's absolutely game-changing, and we really, really appreciate it. We are going to move on to Q&A now, and I really appreciate the fact that the speakers have stayed and will turn on their cameras now to help answer some of the questions that you've been asking. If you do have questions, please remember to put them in the Q&A portion of the Zoom. Some people are posting in chat, which is fine. We'll try to get those, but I can guarantee you we'll get them if they're in Q&A. I want to go ahead and tackle a question that a couple of you have asked because I think it's really important. What we're trying to do today is to inspire you to think about intergenerational shared sites, how you can strengthen the work, how you can begin the work. But that doesn't mean it's not work. People always talk about intergenerational practices as magic, but magic takes work. It takes preparation. It takes realizing that people change as they age, whether it's from 2 to 4 or 40 to 60 or 60 to 80. So it's really making sure that people are prepared. And that's what really makes a high quality intergenerational program. We don't want just a bunch of intergenerational programs where people blend generations and don't necessarily help them understand how important it is to respect each other. But one of the questions several of you have asked about is how do we take those steps to prepare people, both to be involved with people that have dementia, with people that may have declining health, and people that die, because death is real. And I remember once when somebody said to me, I don't want my child in an intergenerational childcare facility because somebody might die. And all I could say was, you're right, somebody will die in your family, in your neighborhood, in your community, and it's how we deal with it, how we process it. So I'd like to ask in particular, Suzanne and Colleen, if they might address how their facilities deal with death and dying and some of the other frailties or difficulties that the children might encounter. So Suzanne, why don't we start with you and then go to Colleen, and then Scott and Eliza, Trent, Lynette, if anyone else has something they want to add, please do. But Suzanne, I know I've been at your facility when you've talked about this topic before. So Suzanne.
Well, it's definitely a real issue, and it's something that we don't just circle around. We look at it, and face it head on. It's a situation that happens frequently in a nursing home or skilled nursing facility such as Grace. And we just are very upfront about it with the students, and the liaison is there to support. And it's sad, and we recognize the grand that we've lost, and we oftentimes we'll gather the kids around, and it's become quite a tradition that we'll gather the children around, and we will just talk about the memories and our favorite memories that we've had of that particular grand who either came in to interact in the classroom or was out on the playground, or just the memories that the children have with the grand. And we really celebrate that. And we actually take that a little step further, and each child does like a little memory picture and captures that memory on paper. And then we put together a little book. And it's been a tradition that we've presented that to a family of the deceased. And it's really just a nice way that we can bring closure to that situation, and to, recognize the reality that death is just part of the circle of life. We always communicate with parents, and we always make sure that the parents have, that first time to follow up with children about the death of one of our residents. But, it's just something that we face head on.
Thanks, Suzanne. Colleen, could you also address the question?
Sure. There's two parts I'd love to talk about. Like Suzanne, we definitely follow the children's lead when talking about death and dying. A child might say, where was Mary today? I didn't see her at the visit. And well, of course, face it head on and say that Mary passed away. And what was your favorite memory of Mary? And we'll kind of follow the lead that way. I think part of the question too was, how do you work with people with dementia on both sides, and younger kids and older adults, and how does that kind of go together? And I think that's a really important question for shared sites. And so all of our caregivers at the Mount, so teachers in the ILC, administrative staff, direct care staff, goes through training yearly on working with people with dementia and memory issues. The average age of our resident here at the Mount is 94. And so you can imagine that is something that we deal with on a daily basis. And so it takes that extra training to be comfortable, working with the residents when you have the children there. But then also when visits are happening, it's not just teachers. Our care staff is there as well. Our caregivers are there to help the visits happen and to make sure everyone is comfortable and having a great time, and those connections and relationships are building. So it's a whole team effort to make that work.
Great. Did anyone else on the panel want to make a comment before we move on? Super. So Samantha, I think that you talked a little bit about what to do during this particular time when people can't necessarily do site visits. But do you have any other specifics in terms of what people can do to connect with their members to make sure that they become champions of intergenerational shared sites?
Yeah, this is great. Thank you, Donna. I think the number one thing that sites can be doing is sharing their story. Get in contact with your member's office and speaking to the staff member that covers those issues. It just depends on how an office is set up. Sometimes that could be the person who handles a child and youth portfolio. It could be somebody who handles an aging portfolio or just a health portfolio. But that office can get you to the right person. And then sharing real stories of what's going on at your program. Talk about how your program is set up, but then also talk about what participants benefit, the benefits that they receive, kind of like what Scott and Elsa were saying in the experience of Elsa's mom and the program that she's a part of. That's really what touches staff members, and then inviting them for a visit, whether it's eventually in person when that's safe, or Senator Casey in our office, we've had a lot of success doing virtual visits to some programs, not specifically intergenerational shared site related, but things broadly across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So invite them to do a virtual video visit, whether that's via Zoom or Skype or whatever platform we're using these days. That's still a great way for them to learn about the work that's taking place, and then just keep them updated of what's happening in your program. And the more they know and the more they hear from you, that'll keep you at the top of their mind, and keep asking them for funding. That's the best you can do.
Thank you, Samantha. And along the line of funding, I wanted to ask Trent a question. There's something that's come up that I think could be very helpful for people on the call. And that is, how do you convince other foundations, other philanthropists to support this kind of work? Because the Eisner Foundation took that bold step several years ago. And I think you've made such a difference in your support of intergenerational work and with the Eisner Prize. So what advice would you give to people who are on this Zoom today and they're going to be talking with a funder in their community?
Yeah, we have found that that the number of people who want to fund intergenerational programs solely to fund intergenerational programs is a very short list, as you know at GU and as many others know. But we've also found that there are a lot of people who want to work in aging or with vulnerable children or education, after school programs, whatever it may be, whole family development, that when approached with an opportunity to invest in a program that has proven track records like many of the people that we've heard from today, it becomes a much easier sell if you tell them that the intergenerational focus, the intergenerational lens is a way to get at high quality outcomes, a win-win-win, as you said before, where we have seniors who are benefiting, where kids are benefiting, and society as a whole is benefiting. And a lot of these high quality programs have really good replicable data that they can share with other people. And so I do think that it's an easier sell than people think it is, because they look into foundations and corporate funders, priority areas, and they don't see intergenerational, and they drop their pen and they go away frustrated. But if they're worried about outcomes for kids or seniors or providing a more equitable society, these intergenerational programs, specifically these shared site programs, can be a really good avenue with a lot of really good data. And people are finding that that's the path to the waterfall.
That's great, Trent. Thanks a lot for that. I'm really inspired. There are a number of questions that are coming in, as well as some really, really good comments on this particular event. And I wanted to mention to people that one of the things that we've been working on is making sure that this community of people who care about intergenerational programs and practices stay connected. And so we've been doing that through some of the educational Zooms, through our communications mechanisms, but also I'm very, very pleased that we're also beginning to plan our biennial international conference, and it will be held in June of 2021. And it will be virtual, which means that our international colleagues, our colleagues from across the country, it'll be easier for us to come together. And that's really a time to connect, to really build a learning community. So I hope you will plan on joining us then. There have been a couple questions, though, because we focused a bit on the programs that have either pre-K, childcare. Are there programs that engage whether it's high school students, middle school students, or college students? And I mentioned I would like to actually ask that of all of our panelists if they're aware of any of those programs. But I know that when I started my remarks, I did mention the Geriatric Career Development Program, which is at-risk high school youth. We know that as the pandemic started, there have been several youth-led initiatives delivering groceries, checking in on older adults that have been started around the country. And again, we're trying to collect and gather those best practices so that we can share them. We have a COVID fact sheet that we've developed, and we're in the process of expanding that to really highlight some of the great work that's being developed that reaches all ages. But do any of the panelists have anything to add about youth, more high school youth or college age? Or do you involve young people of that age in your facilities as well as the children?
Hi, yeah, here at the Mount, we absolutely do. During non-COVID times, of course, when we can have more people in the building, there's a school near us. So 8th grade classroom every year comes in and volunteers with our residents. Last year, they spent a whole year interviewing and getting to know their resident buddy, and then they made shadow boxes of that resident buddy's life, which was incredibly beautiful and meaningful when they presented it to them. And then we have an incredible volunteer force that is intergenerational in itself. So we have volunteers from high school all the way up into volunteers in their 80s too. And so we involve people of every age in our volunteer program coming in to work with our residents. And so although these visits aren't happening in person right now, we have a lot of people from home making phone calls and doing Zoom visits and Skype visits, anything they can to keep the residents engaged and active during this time, and continuing to work on more ways we can incorporate that as well.
Super. Thank you. Suzanne, did you want to comment?
Well, I'll just add in Jinx, we have a high school class that comes into Grace Living Center every year, and they do a really wonderful living history project. And it's just for a short period of time, but the students interview residents and hear about their life stories, and then they write a really lovely narrative piece. And then they have a photograph taken of the resident. And so then that photograph is posted next to the writing piece. And we really try to honor the residents at we have a local place in Jinx called The Hive, and it's just a really great community gathering place. And so we have an evening event where we transport the residents over, and the families of the students, and the students go, and the students get up and they read the narrative pieces. And it's just a really wonderful way to honor both the residents and their families, and just really recognize, who they are and what they bring to our community. And so that's been one little small connection that we've had in terms of, having a living history project that we've done traditionally. And I think we're maybe in our third year now of doing that.
Great, thank you. There's some wonderful examples around the country, again, in our database and on some of the Zooms that we've been able to highlight. But as we're unfortunately needing to get close to winding down today, I did want to, Scott and Elsa, I wanted to ask you a question because I think a lot of people, they say that they want to make sure that the people that they love are in facilities like this. And I think One Generation is just absolutely top notch. I think it's a great, great shared site. And so I'm wondering how you found it, and then also if the fact that they have Spanish language interaction, if that's been helpful to your mother and your mother-in-law.
Why don't you go?
Okay, so I started looking for a place for my mom because she was really being left alone at home. This is back in 2007 here, and she was being left home alone, and she had a key to the house, and she was going out, and she would go around the neighborhood, picking up, uprooting plants from the neighbors, picking up things that people had left outside for like donations for the Salvation Army to pick up. She would go through their things and bring stuff home. She would carry furniture, like backyard furniture or like side tables for the bedroom. I mean, all kinds of things. And she was just collecting everything in our yard. And so I started looking for a place for her. And I happened to drive by One Generation all the time. And I saw that it said intergenerational. So what I did is I called them, and I called them and I asked them how their thing worked, because down the street from that intergenerational program, there's also a senior enrichment program. Oh no, before that, I tried a different place. It was more like an independent, like a senior enrichment program, but a different one. And I started taking her there because I found out that there were Spanish speaking people. But one day the transportation that I had arranged for her didn't arrive, and she left anyway. And she walked for, I don't know how many hours that day to get home. So that's when I really got scared, and I called One Generation. And they told me about their program. So the next day we went and visited. My mom was mad at me. She did not want to go. She said, "You want to put me in a place? You don't want me to be home anymore." And I said, "No, this is just for you to come. It's going to be like a social club. You're going to be with people. You're going to play games. You're going to do activities." And she didn't really want to go, but I kind of convinced her, and she was very reluctant. But she started going, and every day it was really hard for her to go and not be home because she was used to just running around.
So it really worked out well. I mean, you took the time, you found the location, so we'd encourage others to do that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, we found out that there were people that a lot of the caregivers speak Spanish, and there's also a group of seniors that speak Spanish. So she was included in all that, and it was easier for her because she only knows a few words in English.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Sure.
So as we wind down, I want to once again thank all of our panelists. I think you folks just did a fabulous job, and what a great variety. Samantha to tell us about much more about the Hill, Colleen to hear from a parent perspective, but also someone who works in a facility. Elsa and Scott to know how you're looking out for your mother and your mother-in-law and how the intergenerational interaction changes her life. Suzanne, Jinx is just a standard. It's such an absolutely fabulous, fabulous program. And of course, Trent and all of our friends at the Eisner Foundation, we value so much what you're doing for intergenerational work and elevating it. I also want to thank our incredible moderator, Lynette Fraga. Really appreciate your joining us today and helping us today. So we've had a lot of questions that we haven't been able to respond to. Don't hesitate to contact us. We can do some things offline. We can continue the conversation. We want to continue the conversation. But as I said earlier, I really want to make sure that we don't squander this opportunity. The Older Americans Act gives us an incredible opportunity. There are other opportunities as well, as long as we think outside the box and use that intergenerational solutions lens that values and engages people at all stages and ages of life. So thank you again for joining us. We need to make sure that we're investing in the way that we take care of our younger and older and look at the whole, not just the parts, so we can create healthier communities where everyone thrives. Thank you.